The pines breathed with the chill of late autumn, their dark needles whispering as a pale dusk crept across the mountains. Clara Whitfield steadied her stride along the narrow trail, the worn leather of her boots brushing against brittle ferns. 40 years had taught her to walk quietly, to read the language of wind and soil. Behind her lay the judgment of a mining town that had never forgiven a widow for seeking her own life. Ahead stretched only forest and the fragile comfort of solitude. She carried a basket of herbs in one hand, a rolled sketchbook in the other, the scent of resin and cold earth rising like a bomb around her. A copper light bled through the trees as the sun began to sink. Shadows lengthened, sharpening the ridge lines, gilding the edges of every stone. Clara paused to breathe it in, her chest rising with a slow reverence. Here, no one measured her worth by a ring on her finger or the softness of her speech. Here, she belonged to the hush of the mountains, to the chorus of distant water and the faint call of night birds. Then came the sound, low, rhythmic, a chest-deep rumble that slid beneath the usual forest music. She stiffened. It was not the bark of a fox nor the throaty cough of a bear. It rolled through the trees like a heartbeat carried on the wind. Curiosity outweighed fear. She set her basket down, fingers brushing the worn wood of its handle as if to mark her path back, and stepped off the trail. The undergrowth closed around her legs, damp and fragrant. Each step crackled with fallen needles. The sound came again, closer now, deliberate and resonant. She followed it through a veil of mist that clung to the hollows, her pulse matching the strange cadence. The air cooled, heavy with a metallic scent of water, until she reached a clearing where a mountain stream threaded silver between moss-dark stones. There, beside the water, knelt a figure that made the world narrow to a single breath. A massive silverback gorilla, its coat glinting with the last amber light, crouched by the stream. Muscles like carved basalt moved beneath the dark fur as it dipped a broad hand into the current. Drops fell like quicksilver from its fingers. Clara froze, her mind scattering between disbelief and wonder. This was no creature of these northern ranges. It belonged to stories of far-off continents, to books she'd read by candlelight as a girl. And yet it was here, living and breathing in the heart of the American wilderness. The gorilla turned its head, and their eyes met. In that instant the forest seemed to hold its breath. The rattle of water softened, the wind paused among the pines. His gaze was deep, almost human in its calm intelligence. Not a predator's hunger, not the startled fear of a wild animal, something else entirely, something that recognized her presence as more than intrusion. Her own heartbeat thundered, but she felt no urge to flee. Instead, a strange serenity spread through her chest, as if she were standing before a long-lost friend. She took a cautious step forward. The gorilla did not move. The fading sun traced a silver halo along his shoulders, turning the mist behind him into a soft, glowing veil. Clara's breath caught at the quiet majesty of him, the breadth of his chest, the slow rise and fall of each measured breath, the intelligence flickering like dusk fire in his dark eyes. Another step. The cold stream murmured between them. Her boots sank into the damp soil, and a chill climbed her ankles. Still he watched her, head tilted slightly, a flicker of curiosity in the set of his heavy brow. She felt the distance between their worlds narrow, invisible yet undeniable, a thread spun from some forgotten loom. Her mind darted to practical thoughts. How could such a creature survive here, so far from any known jungle? Had it escaped a traveling menagerie, crossed oceans unseen? But those questions dissolved beneath the weight of the moment. What mattered was the silent conversation in their gaze, an unspoken recognition older than names. The breeze shifted, carrying the scent of pine sap and cool stone. Clara realized she was trembling, not from fear but from the enormity of the encounter. She could hear her own pulse, a counterpoint to the steady rhythm of the stream. The gorilla's massive hand rested on a rock slick with water, fingers relaxed, as though he too sensed that this meeting required stillness. For a heartbeat, or perhaps an eternity, they remained like that, woman and wild giant, joined by a quiet understanding that no language could hold. The forest, so often a lonely cathedral for her solitary walks, now felt inhabited by something vast and intimate. She felt herself reflected in those eyes, a creature out of place, surviving where no one expected, carrying a strength shaped by silence. A faint rustle of wings overhead broke the spell. A jay called sharply and darted across the clearing, its blue feathers catching the last flash of sunlight. Clara startled, a small gasp escaping her lips. The gorilla's ears twitched, but he did not retreat. He simply watched her, as if weighing her intentions, as if he too stood at the edge of a choice. Her throat tightened. She wanted to speak, to offer some word of peace, but language felt crude and unnecessary. Instead she let her gaze soften, a silent promise that she meant no harm. She lifted one hand slowly, palm open, a gesture of greeting learned from both humans and the wild. The gorilla's eyes followed the movement. He gave a slow exhale, a sound like distant thunder rolling through a canyon. It resonated in her chest, a vibration more felt than heard. Her heart answered with its own quiet drum. Twilight deepened. Shadows pooled at the base of the trees, and the orange light faded to violet. Clara sensed the moment slipping, as fragile as a dream upon waking. She took a careful step back, then another, her eyes never leaving his. He remained kneeling by the stream, an ancient sentinel carved of flesh and twilight. When the last sliver of sun disappeared, she finally turned. Her breath quickened as she retraced her path through the mist, the forest alive with a new electricity. Behind her, she thought she heard a soft rumble, neither warning nor farewell, but something that acknowledged her retreat. She emerged onto the trail and found her basket where she had left it. The handle felt warm against her cold fingers, as though it had waited for her in patient silence. Above, the first stars pierced the darkening sky. She glanced back once, toward the clearing hidden by trees. Nothing stirred, yet she felt the presence linger, vast and steady as the mountains themselves. The walk home stretched long beneath the rising moon. Every sound, the crunch of needles, the sigh of wind, carried a new depth. She felt both lighter and heavier, as if some hidden chamber in her heart had been unlocked. The loneliness that had shadowed her for years now shifted into something different, a quiet anticipation, a recognition that the wilderness held mysteries she had only begun to touch. By the time her cabin's lantern came into view, the night was full and bright with stars. Clara paused on the threshold, her breath curling in the cold. Somewhere beyond the ridges, a low distant rumble echoed, soft, patient, and impossibly familiar. She pressed a hand to her chest, feeling her heart answer, and stepped inside, carrying the memory of dark eyes and silent understanding into the warmth of the waiting fire. The days that followed were steeped in the kind of quiet that made the forest seem infinite. Clara rose each morning with a strange eagerness, her basket filled with apples and late autumn berries. She walked the narrow trail as frost glazed the ferns, breath ghosting in the pale air. At the stream she set her offerings on a flat stone and waited, sketchbook balanced on her knees. The woods remained hushed except for the occasional flicker of wings or the soft crack of a twig. Somewhere among the pines he watched, she felt it more than saw it, a presence vast and steady as the mountain itself. At first there was only the sound of water and the shifting scent of pine, but each day the distance between them shortened. One morning a low grunt carried across the clearing, and she glimpsed him among the trees, silver for catching the dawn. He did not step closer, yet his dark eyes held her in a calm, measuring gaze. She lifted her pencil, sketching the broad slope of his shoulders, the gentle tilt of his head. Hours passed like minutes. By evening he had edged nearer, until the space between them felt like a shared circle of breath. The rhythm of their meetings became a quiet covenant. She brought fruit, he accepted her nearness. When she painted, he sometimes settled on a mossy log, the forest alive with birdsong around them. No words passed, only the patient exchange of glances and the subtle trust that grew in silence. Clara found herself laughing at small things, a squirrel's sudden leap, the way the wind combed through his fur like silver grass. Her own voice startled her after so many years of solitude, but he only blinked, untroubled, as if he understood that laughter was its own language. Winter crept down from the high peaks in a rush of icy wind. Snow fell heavy and relentless, burying the trails in white silence. Clara stayed in her cabin when the storms raged, the world outside a blur of whirling flakes. One night, as the gale howled against the shutters, a deep crash shook the porch. She grabbed her lantern and opened the door to a scene of swirling snow and shadow. There he stood, immense and shivering, one arm held awkwardly against his chest. Blood darkened the fur near his wrist, stark against the white. Her heart surged with fear and resolve. "Easy," she whispered, though she knew he could not understand the word. He swayed, exhausted, eyes clouded with pain. She stepped into the storm, the lantern's light flickering across his massive frame, and guided him with soft gestures toward the open doorway. Somehow he followed, ducking beneath the beam, bringing the scent of wild earth and cold stone into her small cabin. Inside, the fire cast a trembling glow over the rough-hewn walls. She set the lantern down and knelt beside him. A cruel steel trap bit into his arm, the jagged teeth slick with blood. Her breath quickened, but her hand stayed steady as she fetched a knife and hot water. He watched her every move, muscles taut, yet he made no sound when she pried the trap apart and drew it free. The wound bled freely, she pressed clean cloth against it, murmuring words she hadn't spoken in years, gentle reassurances, fragments of prayer. Their breath mingled in the warm, pine-scented air, her own heartbeat echoing the deep rumble of his chest. When the bleeding slowed, she wrapped the injury in strips of linen. He remained still, eyes fixed on her with a depth she could hardly bear. In that quiet she felt the weight of something unspoken, a trust freely given, a recognition that crossed the boundaries of species and speech. For a long while they stayed like that, firelight dancing across the walls, snow hissing against the windows. Days passed. The storm eased, but he lingered near the cabin, his wound healing beneath her careful tending. Sometimes he ventured out into the drifts, returning at dusk with the smell of spruce and wildness clinging to his fur. She found comfort in his presence, a companionship that asked nothing and gave everything. They walked beneath moonlit pines, her lantern casting soft halos on the snow. He moved beside her with surprising grace, each breath of winter air carrying a shared sense of survival. Clara began to speak to him as they traveled the quiet woods. She told stories of the life she had left behind, a husband whose sharp words cut deeper than any blade, a town that measured a woman's worth by obedience and ring size. She spoke of the loneliness that had trailed her like a shadow, of the dreams she'd buried beneath years of duty. He listened, or so it felt, his dark eyes steady, the soft rumble in his chest a low, reassuring answer. One night they paused on a ridge where the moon glazed the world in silver. Below them the valley lay hushed beneath a quilt of snow, the river a frozen ribbon. Clara lifted her face to the sky, the cold biting her cheeks, and laughed, a sudden, free sound that startled even herself. He turned his great head, watching her with a calm that seemed almost amused. For the first time in decades, the laughter felt unchained, rising from a place deeper than memory. Their bond grew in the quiet ways the wilderness understands. He never tried to confine her, never demanded more than presence. Yet his nearness filled the empty spaces in her life with something fiercer and more honest than any courtship she had known. When she placed her hand against his massive arm, feeling the slow, steady pulse beneath, it was not ownership but recognition. Two beings, each scarred, each solitary, choosing companionship without need for words. The forest became their sanctuary. Days stretched into a rhythm of shared paths and silent understanding. In his company Clara felt a strength that no town could grant, a defiance of the world's narrow rules. She realized that love, in its purest form, might not belong to any single shape or name. It was in the trust of a gaze, the warmth of a silent walk through snow, the simple act of standing together against the loneliness of the world.